Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Catch-22, 1970. At the beginning of the 1970s, as war in Vietnam raged, consuming thousands of American soldiers on its misguided bonfire, revolt against the unjustified military waste of lives wasn't just protested on the streets. Filmmakers with a conscience took up arms too. Robert Altman targeted the insanity of U.S. foreign policy and the senseless slaughter of the young by disguising it under the retro banner of setting the brilliant MASH during the earlier Korean War. With Catch-22, the equally revered theater and film director Mike "The Graduate" Nichols and celebrated writer Buck Henry took Joseph Heller's World War II novel, published in 1961, and used its past setting to comment with even darker satire on the then-current war in Southeast Asia. It's a madcap and nightmarish collection of insane characters that all live in their own crazy reality on a fictional Mediterranean army base. They orbit around Bombardier Captain Yozarian, a career high for Alan Arkin, a tightly wound ball of tense paranoia on the constant verge of cracking up. His symptoms actually mark him out as being possibly the only sane person on the base. Everyone else seems to have developed bizarre, idiosyncratic ways of coping with their situation, which he cannot agree with. Sadly, that's the problem. His relatively healthy mindset means he cannot claim to be crazy enough to get out of the ever-rising number of bombing missions set by the brusquely plebeian Colonel Cathcart, Martin Balsam. He tries to get the marvelous Jack Gilford as Doc Danica to sign him off the ludicrously dangerous runs, but Danica's hands are tied. He invokes Catch-22, which he explains as, "Anyone who wants to get out of combat isn't really crazy, so I can't ground them." There's the rub. That's some catch, that Catch-22. Danica is similarly admiring of its infuriatingly watertight logic. It's the best there is. Including Balsam and Gilford, Catch-22 has one of the biggest gatherings of top American talent in one film, no doubt helped by the illustrious Nichols being in charge. It's especially impressive for its character actors. Richard Benjamin's Major Danby is a gently crackers officer who announces missions in a sing-song bedtime story narration that clearly nails him as seriously out of touch with the grave consequences of his work. Charles Grodin is Captain Aardvark, a pipe man whose calm exterior conceals a later, alarming homicidal tendency. Bob Balaban's Captain Orr is a rare chance to see him relaxed rather than the on-edge, nervy nebbish he later plays so much. In fact, he's disconcertingly so, waiting patiently in his superior's waiting room whilst dripping wet from being fished out of the sea for the umpteenth time. Anthony Perkins is a splendidly brittle and self-conscious Chaplain Tapman. The much-loved late Bob Newhart makes a hilarious Major, a paranoid, over-promoted officer who dodges any interaction by always being out of the office, as he instructs the bemused Norman Fell. Amongst the bigger leading names, we have Martin Sheen's Lieutenant Dobbs, who first, unwittingly, introduces us to the circular logic in an argument with Yozarian that has our man at least making it work for him. Dobbs: "Just suppose everyone thought the way you do." Yozarian: "Then I'd be a damn fool to think any different." Further into the plot, Dobbs decides to kill his commanding officer and goes missing to be heard about at the end. John Voight is a winningly loopy Lieutenant Milo Minderbinder, whose entrepreneurial bent has him turning the base into a giant syndicate that trades all of its raw materials, including parachute silk, morphine, and military hardware, in return for other goods to make a profit. Share certificates are given out but prove small consolation to dead men. Art Garfunkel makes a blissfully serene Nately, who is glad of the increasing missions as he intends to never go home, instead shacking up with the love of his life, whom he doesn't understand is a professional prostitute using him. Probably the most vivid character cameo of all is the terrifying General Dreedle. Who else but the towering presence of Orson Welles? He roars into the base, intimidating all and sundry, and generating at least some vestige of normalcy in his men via their tortured moans over his lusciously pneumatic girlfriend. Dreedle doesn't suffer fools gladly, even within his intimate relations. "Get back in the car, you smirking slut," He orders her, savouring such outrageous gem lines as these. His son-in-law, the great Austin Pendleton, gets similarly short shrift as his nincompoop son-in-law, who continually reminds him of the perils of nepotism. Don't pay any attention to Dad. Later, when Dreedle has to give a medal to the strategically naked on-parade Yossarian, he eyes the bombardier with ill-disguised contempt. "You're a very weird person, Yossarian." For much of the film, there is a recurring dreamlike series of vignettes featuring dazzling white backgrounds suggesting heaven. We are gradually bled in scenes of Yossarian struggling with a dying crewman on board his plane, Snowden, in surreal sequences that are peculiarly calming amongst the madness, until Snowden fatally bleeds out his entrails in gruesome detail. As the film gets into its third act, the tone becomes progressively darker. Yossarian ventures into Rome, befriending a cunning old Italian man in his home who later disappears. We see male prostitutes, and a farmer shipping his dead cart horse in a back street, and the chilling discovery of Aardvark having casually raped and then killed a prostitute. Hungry Joe, one of the crewmen, is cut in half in a powerfully deadpan visual sequence by a biplane piloted by a colleague, McWatt, who was jealous over Yossarian's romance with an American beauty. Danica is at their side, watching the plane crash into a cliff face, assuring the group that he is not on board, but he was all along, and is now a spectral presence looking on. Yossarian laments the waste of his life and the war, summing up the sum total of his former friendships around him. Nately was blown to bits, McWatt killed himself, Hungry Joe's chopped in two, Dobbs disappeared, Aardvark's a murderer, Dr. Nika's a zombie. The only friend I had is Snowden, and I didn't know him. The film ends, though, in upbeat, abandoned fashion, as Yossarian finds out that Dobbs survived and got away. On hearing this, he tears off his uniform in delirious joy and dashes into the sea, paddling a dinghy as the camera pulls back to render him a speck on the ocean. It's a gloriously futile way to go, but what other option is there for a man trapped in insanity? Catch-22 is a fantastic, surreal, complex, dark, and deranged satire that ultimately makes sense of the climate of greater madness in serving someone else's war machine. Like MASH, it's a film whose themes will never date, as the supposedly civilized Western world's governments and military continually find new reasons and agendas to throw men and women callously to their deaths. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.